The struggle for India's independence was not a single unified movement. It was a complex tapestry of ideas, strategies, and personalities, each vying to define the path the nation would take. Two figures stood at the forefront of this struggle, representing contrasting visions for India's future: Mahatma Gandhi, the man of nonviolence and civil disobedience, and Subhash Chandra Bose, the firebrand who believed that freedom could only be won through armed struggle. Understanding their approaches reveals not just their personalities, but the profound dilemmas faced by a nation on the verge of liberation. Mahatma Gandhi, born in 1869 in Porbandar, was shaped by a unique set of experiences that informed his philosophy. Educated in law in London and exposed to racial discrimination in South Africa, he developed a deep understanding of injustice and the power of moral resistance. Gandhi's approach was rooted in the concept of satyagraha, or truth force, a principle that emphasized nonviolent resistance, civil disobedience, and moral integrity as tools for political change. He believed that oppression could be challenged not through bloodshed, but through the power of conscience, both of the oppressor and the oppressed. Gandhi saw moral strength as a weapon more potent than any army, and he aimed to awaken the ethical responsibility of the British rulers to recognize the legitimacy of Indian demands. Subhash Chandra Bose, born in 1897 in Cuttack, emerged from a different milieu. Educated in India and later in England, Bose was drawn to the idea of radical change and decisive action. He admired the militaristic and revolutionary movements. He observed abroad and was convinced that colonial powers respected only strength. Bose's strategy rested on the belief that India's freedom could not be postponed indefinitely. The time for moral appeals had passed. In his view, relying solely on nonviolent protest risked prolonging subjugation. Bose envisioned an India that seized its destiny through assertive action, even if it meant forming alliances with global powers that were adversarial to Britain. The contrast between Gandhi and Bose became particularly evident in the political arena of the 1930s. The Indian National Congress, the leading nationalist organization, was a stage where these ideological tensions played out. Gandhi's leadership was marked by mass mobilizations such as the Salt March of 1930, where thousands defied British salt laws in a dramatic display of civil disobedience. The march was symbolic and strategic. By violating an economic regulation that affected every Indian, Gandhi demonstrated the collective power of ordinary people, compelling the British to confront the moral legitimacy of colonial laws. Gandhi's campaigns emphasized nonviolence, not as a weakness, but as a conscious strategy to appeal to global conscience, to show that India's cause was just and humane. Bose, however, grew increasingly frustrated with what he perceived as the limitations of Gandhian tactics. He argued that nonviolence, while morally admirable, could not dismantle an entrenched empire determined to maintain its control. Bose's frustration culminated in his resignation from the Congress presidency in 1939. He believed that a bolder, more aggressive approach was necessary and that the Indian people should prepare to confront Britain with force if necessary. Bose's vision was global in scope. He was willing to seek alliances with Germany and Japan during World War II to equip an army capable of liberating India. His outlook was that freedom was a practical goal to be seized, not a moral truth to be demonstrated. The divergence of their philosophies became even more pronounced during the Second World War. Gandhi opposed India's involvement in the war without the explicit promise of independence, initiating the Quit India movement in 1942, a nationwide call for immediate British withdrawal. The movement relied on mass protests, strikes, and civil disobedience, and it showcased Gandhi's unwavering belief that ethical resistance could force a colonial power to negotiate. Yet, the British response was severe. Leaders were imprisoned, demonstrations were suppressed, and thousands were killed in confrontations. Gandhi accepted these sacrifices as the cost of principled resistance, emphasizing that true freedom would be meaningless if achieved through hatred or violence. Meanwhile, Bose took a radically different path. Escaping house arrest in India, he traveled abroad to rally support for armed struggle. Bose established the Indian National Army, INA, in Southeast Asia with Japanese assistance, intending to march into India and liberate it by force. He appealed to a sense of urgency and national pride, arguing that waiting for Britain to voluntarily leave was futile. Bose's rhetoric emphasized duty, courage, and action, contrasting sharply with Gandhi's moral appeals. While Gandhi aimed to win hearts and minds, Bose sought to demonstrate power and create facts on the ground that could compel independence. Their approaches also reflected different attitudes toward Indian society. Gandhi believed in the transformative power of self-purification and grassroots mobilization. He saw Indian peasants, workers, and even marginalized communities as agents of moral and political change. By organizing them into disciplined, nonviolent movements, Gandhi aimed to build a political consciousness that would sustain a free India. Bose, in contrast, prioritized military and organizational strength. He believed that political awakening alone was insufficient. Freedom demanded action and readiness to confront a powerful empire directly. His Aina recruited soldiers, organized training camps, and developed a chain of command, aiming for immediate effectiveness rather than moral persuasion. Yet, despite their differences, both leaders shared a common goal: the end of British colonial rule. They also understood that their strategies were complementary in certain respects. Gandhi's nonviolent campaigns kept the Indian cause visible on the world stage, garnering sympathy and moral support. Bose's efforts, though more radical, created a sense of urgency that signaled to both the British and the Indian public that independence could not be indefinitely postponed. Their coexistence highlighted the spectrum of resistance. One approach appealed to conscience, the other to pragmatism and urgency. The post-war period revealed the complexities of their legacies. Gandhi's moral authority remained unparalleled. He was celebrated as the symbol of peaceful resistance and ethical leadership. Bose, on the other hand, was posthumously glorified for his daring and vision, even though his direct military actions were ultimately constrained by the geopolitical realities of the time. The INA failed to achieve immediate military success, but its existence inspired Indian soldiers and created a psychological pressure on the British. The trials of INA officers after the war became a rallying point, highlighting the sacrifices made by those who pursued armed struggle. Examining their personal characteristics also sheds light on their strategies. Gandhi's temperament was patient, reflective, and deeply spiritual, allowing him to endure long campaigns with minimal resources. Bose was energetic, decisive, and charismatic, capable of inspiring loyalty and courage among followers. Both recognized the power of symbolism. Gandhi in marches, fasting, and speeches. Bose in flags, uniforms, and organized military formations. Their choices were influenced not merely by ideology but by temperament, opportunity, and the urgency imposed by historical circumstances. In assessing whether one approach was superior, it becomes clear that the question cannot be answered simplistically. Gandhi's methods ultimately paved the way for a relatively peaceful transfer of power in 1947. Emphasizing negotiation, moral legitimacy, and the creation of democratic structures. Bose's approach, though riskier and ultimately unrealized in its immediate objectives, accelerated the sense of inevitability that British rule was ending. His willingness to take bold action pressured the colonial government and inspired a generation of Indians to envision freedom as an achievable and immediate goal rather than a distant aspiration. Both leaders also faced profound dilemmas. Gandhi struggled with the violence erupting during communal riots, questioning whether his philosophy could contain human passions in a society fractured by centuries of colonial manipulation. Bose, conversely, had to navigate alliances with Axis powers, raising ethical questions about the means to achieve freedom. Each faced criticism from contemporaries and historians, Gandhi for being too passive, Bose for being too radical. Their legacies are inseparable from these debates, reflecting the tension between principle and pragmatism, morality and necessity. The interplay between their strategies reveals the multidimensional nature of the independence movement. Gandhi's campaigns mobilized millions of ordinary citizens, creating a moral pressure on Britain that resonated internationally. Bose's efforts emphasized the urgency of action, creating a parallel narrative of determination and resolve. Together, they illustrate that independence was not achieved by a single path, but through a convergence of moral authority, political negotiation, and the willingness to confront power directly. The year 1942 marked a turning point in India's struggle, highlighting the divergent paths of Gandhi and Bose. Gandhi's Quit India movement, launched in August, demanded the immediate withdrawal of the British, relying entirely on mass civil disobedience. Tens of thousands of Indians were arrested, including Gandhi himself, and the movement faced brutal suppression. Despite these hardships, the movement demonstrated the scale and discipline of nonviolent resistance. Gandhi believed that enduring oppression without retaliation would expose the moral bankruptcy of British colonial rule. Yet the British underestimated the psychological impact. The very act of millions defying authority without resorting to violence challenged the legitimacy of imperial control. Meanwhile, Bose had already taken decisive action abroad. Having escaped house arrest in India, he traveled through Afghanistan, the Soviet Union, and eventually to Germany and Japan, seeking support to form an army capable of liberating India. His charisma and vision inspired thousands of Indian expatriates and prisoners of war to join the Indian National Army, INA. Bose's strategy emphasized immediate action. He was willing to take risks that Gandhi would never entertain, arguing that liberation delayed was liberation denied. He believed that moral considerations could be subordinated to the urgent goal of freedom, asserting that an Indian soldier's duty was to fight for his country regardless of the alliances formed. The INA's campaigns in Southeast Asia, though ultimately limited by Japan's broader strategic failures, had a profound impact on India's psyche. Reports of Indian soldiers confronting British forces abroad, coupled with Bose's radio broadcasts and speeches, reached back home and inspired hope and nationalist fervor. Even though Bose did not live to see India free, his death in 1945 under mysterious circumstances prevented him from witnessing independence. His actions left a lasting legacy. The trials of INA soldiers after the war became a rallying point, creating widespread sympathy and fueling nationalist sentiment that accelerated the British decision to leave India. The contrast between Gandhi and Bose also illustrates the complex relationship between morality, pragmatism, and strategy in political movements. Gandhi's approach required patience, discipline, and a belief in the innate moral compass of humanity. It emphasized ethical means to achieve political ends, assuming that justice could be leveraged through moral pressure. Bose, on the other hand, prioritized immediate results and strategic leverage. He argued that the British Empire, entrenched and powerful, would not relinquish control unless confronted with force or the credible threat of force. Their paths were fundamentally different, yet both were aimed at the same destination, a free India. The independence of India in 1947 reflects an interplay of these strategies. Gandhi's nonviolent resistance created moral and political pressure that made British rule increasingly untenable, especially in the aftermath of World War II, when Britain was economically weakened and globally discredited. Bose's militancy, though not directly successful in military terms, created a sense of urgency and demonstrated that many Indians were unwilling to wait for a gradual transition. The British realized that maintaining control would be costly not only economically but also socially and politically, facing both organized civil disobedience and the possibility of armed insurrection. Another layer of complexity emerges when considering communal tensions. Gandhi consistently emphasized Hindu-Muslim unity and sought to prevent religious violence from undermining the independence movement. Bose, while focused on the goal of national liberation, placed less emphasis on these internal divisions. In some ways, Gandhi's insistence on inclusivity and ethical consistency helped to legitimize the independence movement internationally, showing that India's struggle was not merely a power grab but a moral quest for justice. Bose's focus on action, while galvanizing, sometimes overlooked the nuanced social realities that Gandhi carefully navigated. The two approaches also influenced post-independence India in profound ways. Gandhi's legacy shaped the nation's democratic ethos, emphasizing constitutionalism, nonviolence, and moral responsibility. His vision of an inclusive society, rooted in ethical governance, provided a blueprint for India's leaders to build institutions that aimed to balance power with accountability. Bose's legacy, while less institutionalized, continued to inspire activism, military valor, and the recognition that freedom often requires courage and decisive action. In political discourse, Bose became a symbol of urgency and daring. reminding future generations that liberty may demand boldness alongside patience. It is also important to understand the historical context that framed their choices. The British Empire, though weakened by the global war, remained a formidable power. Gandhi's nonviolent campaigns appealed to a global audience, especially in an era when public opinion was increasingly influential. Bose's strategy leveraged the international situation pragmatically, recognizing that alliances, even controversial ones, could provide the tools necessary to challenge colonial power. Both leaders were shaped by the constraints and opportunities of their times, responding to the same challenge through different lenses. Critics of Gandhi argue that nonviolence alone might have prolonged British rule indefinitely. Without the moral pressure of mass civil disobedience and the international scrutiny it created, Britain might have resisted giving up India for many more years. Critics of Bose, meanwhile, highlight the ethical risks of his alliances and the possibility that armed struggle could have resulted in catastrophic loss of life without guaranteeing independence. Yet evaluating their contributions requires a recognition that movements of such magnitude are rarely linear. Multiple strategies can coexist, interact, and reinforce each other in unpredictable ways. One striking dimension is how their paths intersected symbolically, even when not directly coordinated. Bose's militant actions and the INA's campaigns highlighted the seriousness of Indian aspirations, complementing Gandhi's moral campaigns by demonstrating that Indians were willing to fight and sacrifice. This combination created a dual pressure on the British, morally, politically, and psychologically, making continued occupation increasingly untenable. It is plausible to suggest that without the awareness of Bose's assertive stance, Gandhi's non-violent campaigns alone might not have produced the same urgency in British calculations. Furthermore, Gandhi's ability to withstand imprisonment, maintain discipline among followers, and negotiate with the British showcased the power of organized civil resistance. Bose's willingness to take risks, travel across continents, and organize an army demonstrated courage and vision that inspired not just his contemporaries but also the military ethos of later generations. Together, they represent complementary approaches to leadership, one rooted in ethics and moral authority, the other in pragmatism and audacity. In retrospect, the debate over Gandhi versus Bose is not about who was right or more effective. Both approaches were necessary components of a complex liberation struggle. Gandhi ensured that India's independence was grounded in moral legitimacy and mass participation, while Bose instilled a sense of urgency and showcased the readiness to assert national sovereignty through force if required. Their combined influence illustrates that successful liberation often requires a spectrum of strategies, balancing idealism with realism, patience with action, and morality with pragmatism. The independence of India on August 15, 1947, was thus the culmination of decades of struggle, shaped by diverse strategies and visionary leaders. Gandhi and Bose, while representing contrasting paths, both left indelible marks on history. Gandhi's legacy continues to inspire movements for civil rights and nonviolent resistance worldwide, while Bose's vision reminds us that bold action and courage are sometimes indispensable in the quest for freedom. Their stories together underscore the multifaceted nature of liberation. It is never achieved by a single tactic, ideology, or individual, but by the convergence of ideas, actions, and enduring commitment to justice. In conclusion, the struggle between Gandhi's nonviolent approach and Bose's militant strategy illuminates the complexity of India's journey to independence. Gandhi appealed to conscience, morality, and the transformative power of collective, peaceful resistance. Bose emphasized urgency, action, and the practical realities of confronting a powerful colonial empire. Both paths were essential, and their interplay shaped the course of history. The story of India's independence is not one of a single hero or a single approach, but of a nation navigating between ethics and pragmatism, patience and courage, vision and action. Gandhi and Bose, through their distinct paths, together carved a future for India that was free, sovereign, and capable of inspiring generations to come.